I'm going to start out with making some of the layered pockets to start with. So a layered pocket is just a pocket that you can slip things inside, which has multiple layers to it. So 2, 3, 4 layers. It doesn't really matter how many. I'm just going to start by cutting up some of this plain brown paper to start with. So there's no specific size that you need to make these. I'm going to be making my pages 6 inches by 6 inches, so I might start making the first one 5 inches here. So I've just got a 5-inch strip here, and then I'm going to cut this into essentially a stacked pocket. So the first one I'll make 5 inches tall. The next one I'll do 4 inches tall. So essentially that's what we're going to have there. So we're going to be able to put things in here and behind here when we stick this down to the page. But rather than leaving this plain, I'm actually going to use one of my book pages here. And I'm going to cut the top pocket out of that. So I want this section here. So I'll cut that to the same width, so that's still 5 inches there. And this one's going to be 3 inches tall, so I'm just having a look where my 3-inch mark is here, and that's going to be approximately the top of it. First of all, just going to cut the bottom off there. And cutting that one to 3 inches. So that's what our stacked pocket will end up looking like. Just going to move this aside for the moment. So I want to do some decoration on this brown part here. I don't want to leave that quite as plain as it is there. So I'm going to do a bit of stenciling to start with. So I've just got my distressing here and just a sponge fingertip dauber here. So with this one, you don't have to cover the whole thing because the bottom section here will be covered by the next pocket. So just a bit up the top is fine. And I'm also going to ink the edges of these when I'm done as well. So if I'm working on a cutting mat, I do like putting a piece of lined paper underneath. It just helps protect my cutting mat from getting covered in ink. So you can do the stenciling a lot more evenly than what I'm doing it, but I quite like the effect of it being a bit more inconsistent. Especially if you're going for an aged effect, it definitely helps add to that. That's what my 2 pockets look like now. And I might actually round the corners of these. So this is just a generic 3-step corner rounder, and I think these are like maybe $10 online. They're not very expensive at all. I definitely recommend getting one like this if you are doing a lot of journaling. I'm just going to slightly round the corners there. And do the same on this one as well. So that's what we've got there so far. So I'm going to go around and just ink the edges now. So this is just putting a little bit of ink along the edge, which helps give sort of a bit of an aged effect to the paper. Now this is definitely not necessary, but I do like the effect that it gives there. And if you don't want to go for an aged effect, if you're going for more of a bold look, you can also ink in bright colours, or even like a gold and silver can look quite nice. It's a bit subtle on there. I don't know if you can see it too much. You can see it along the edges a bit more here. With the pockets though, I'm not going to go all the way around. Once again, I'm just going to do the top part where you'll actually be able to see. So if you don't have a Dauber, but you want to ink the edges, you can also just directly use the ink pad as well. It makes it a little bit darker, but it still gives you a very similar effect. You'll get a bit more of a subtle effect if you use a sponge ink pad. So this one has fabric over the top, but if you have one that's just sponge, it will be a lot more subtle. And I'll just give those a minute to dry off there. I feel like I need to add something else here, so I might do a little bit of stamping for that part. I'm just going to go with, try this one and see how that goes. So I think I want to do a different colour to stamp this on, and then stick one of my little fussy cut pictures over the top. Just going to grab this orange. That's going to go quite well with the brown without standing out too much. And I'm just going to cut off a small section to start with. And I think I might do this one in the green. The colour's not going to come through too much on the orange, but it'll give that little hint of colour there. Now, to clean off the ink pad, I like just stamping it a few times on scrap paper. I find it's the best to get off the excess ink there. Oh, my stamping pad's a little bit dirty there. And then I'm just going to fussy cut around that. So fussy cutting just means to cut with a pair of scissors around a shape. So these don't have to be elaborate shapes. You'll see later on some of the images that I've fussy cut from the books are quite detailed, but something like this with straight lines or like a square image or something from a book can be a lot easier to fussy cut if you have issues with your hand mobility. There we go. I might just round the corners on this one too, just because I like rounded corners. Just think they give everything a bit of a softer look. And you don't actually have to be perfectly neat when you're fussy cutting either. I don't know if you can see that along the edge here. I haven't actually cut a perfectly straight line there, but one of the beauties of doing a junk journal is it doesn't really matter. things aren't supposed to be perfect. So for my glue, I use just a little needle tip squeeze bottle from the dollar store or the $2 shop, and I put art glitter glue in there. So if you are going to do a lot of paper crafting, it's definitely one that I would recommend. I'm just going to go on this middle pocket. Bear with me a moment, let me get my glue working. Okay, should be good to go now. So in this pocket, I'm just going to do put glue along the two sides and the bottom. And carefully line that up with what I've got here. Now with this glue, you do have a few seconds to move it around if it's not quite in the right place, but then it will actually grip relatively quickly. So it's really good for doing the paper crafts, and unless your paper is particularly thin, it doesn't really give much in the way of warping either. So I'm just going to do the same with this last pocket. I might just trim off a bit of that fluffy edge along the bottom there. I think my cutting blade needs replacing, but I'm not quite sure where to get those ones from, so I haven't actually done that yet. It's going to go on there like that. Once again, just lining up the bottom to start with, and then gently pressing it down. Then with this one, I think I'm going to pop that on the edge there like that. With these needle nose bottles, you do want to make sure that you pop the cap on them as soon as you're done, because the glue does dry out in the tip otherwise. That's what I had before, so I had to use a thin sewing needle to clear that out. So that's what we've got so far, and I'm just going to look for another image to put on there. Maybe a small bird or a butterfly or something would be nice. Something else I might add on there. One of the things that I did do with this book is with the extra pieces. So where I cut around, I did have some text that was left over in the scrap, so I've just roughly cut those out as well. Alright, I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm actually going to use my glue stick for this. I've not used these ones before, so I'm not sure how well it will glue. It's a scented one, a blueberry scent. But we'll give it a go, we'll see how we go. And I will use this glue for the bird just because it's a lot easier to get it along the fine details. Got a bit much glue there. just making sure I push the edges down quite well, because with the fine detail it does tend to come up at the edges a little bit more. And there's the first stacked pocket complete. To go with this pocket, I'm going to make 3 little journaling cards, so one to sit in each pocket and one to sit behind it when it's on the page. So I'm going to start by cutting a strip of 4 inches of the brown paper. I'm going to make these in the same colour, so they are going to not stand out too much there. And I'm actually going to make these the same height as the pockets. So although we have a bit of glue along the bottom, they won't sit all the way down, but that will mean that they'll actually just sit slightly above the pockets, which will make it a bit easier to get them out. So we'll have one 3 inches tall, one 4 inches tall, and one 5 inches tall. Now, once again, I'm going to round the corners on these ones. I'll just clear this out of the way for a minute. I'm going to use some of this paper, which just has like little gum leaves on it, and I'm actually going to cut some tabs for these. I'm going to use this tab punch. So this is quite large, but it will make the journaling cards quite easy to get out. Sorry, this might be a bit loud. So with these ones, once you've got them cut out, you just fold them in half. And then if you like them just plain, you can just glue them down to the edge like that. However, I want to do some inking before I do that, and I also want to do some stenciling on these cards. I'm going to use a bone folder, which is a little plastic tool with a somewhat pointed edge, just to get those creases nice and smooth there. So I'll show you the difference that makes. So that's how it naturally sits before I reinforce it. And then once I've gone over it with the bone folder, it naturally sits a lot closer. So it'll make it sit a lot neater and a lot flatter in the final piece. So with this one, I don't want it to be quite the same as the pocket, so I'm going to use a different stencil. And I'm just going to use this sponge. It's not actually a makeup sponge, it is actually sold for ink, but it's essentially the same as what you get for a makeup sponge. So once again, I'm not going for a perfectly neat look there. I'm going for a bit of variation in the depth of the colour. And I do recommend, if you do like stenciling, to try out some different daubers and ink tools, just because they do tend to give quite different effects. So it's a good idea to play with a few and see what you like. Alright, so that's what we've got there so far. And once again, I'm going to go around and ink the edges on this. I'm not going to add anything in terms of extra paper on top of these, because I don't want it to get caught when it goes in and out of the pockets. So because these pockets are quite flat, it is a risk that if there's a loose edge on any paper that's on there, then it can actually pull up when you put it into the pocket. Now, because I want these ones to be able to be used as journaling cards, I'm also going to add some lines onto the back. So with these ones, I do recommend that you do ink in the direction of the lines. If you go across the lines, then quite often your stencil will fold up. So I'm not going for a very heavy colour here, just enough to actually see the lines to guide the writing. So if you're ever unsure if you have enough colour on through the stencil, you can use one hand to hold an edge of it and sort of peel it back a bit, and you'll be able to see if you need to put a bit more ink on there without moving it around. I'm going to put just a little bit more here. Alright, perfect. I'm pretty happy with that. So depending on the type of ink you use, you may want to wash your stencil straight away. Distress ink is water soluble, and I know from experience that it does wash off the stencils quite well, so I'm not too worried about that. Although I might actually ink along the edges of those as well. So to highlight the difference the ink in the edges can make, there's one that's inked compared to one that's not. Doing this inking can get a bit messy. It does get all over your fingers, so I do like to just keep some wet wipes on hand so I can just clean up as I go. But I'm just going to finish these off before I do that. So I just want to quickly mark the center of these so that I can make sure I'm putting the tabs on evenly. So I'm just getting my cutting board back out for the measurements here. So you won't see this in the end because it will be underneath that tab. This is just to show me where I need to place it. So with the tabs, you can choose whether to put them right along the edge. I tend to prefer with these ones to make that curved edge flush with the top, but it's up to you, whichever you'd like to do. I am just going to quickly mark the center of these ones too. So this part's not necessarily necessary. You can just do it by eye if you want to. I just prefer when I'm doing a set like this to make them make sure that they match a bit better. I'm just going to get my glue. Oh, I've got a bit much there. Now I'm skipping this part in the middle on one side because when I fold this over, it will be touching this side here, but I need the bottom of both sides to have glue because that's going to sit on either side of my journaling card. Put that one around there just so I can see my mark. I'm going to lay that on there. This may get a bit messy. I'll probably get a bit of glue on my mat, but that's not a problem. Just making sure that's pressed down all the way along. Definitely had a bit too much glue on that one. Now I will use my bone folder. Actually, I might use this one. I'm going to use the flat side along here, just to make sure that where the edge of the underneath part is nice and secure, so these two sides are stuck together really well. Just going to leave that aside to dry for a minute. I've got that a little too far along, so because this glue does have a small amount of working time, I can just gently move that into place where I want it to be. So that's my set of 3 journaling cards there. And they will live inside these pockets. Now with this one, because it's got the lip on the back, I need to just make sure I'm lifting that up a little bit when I'm popping it in, so that that lip is not catching on the next pocket up. Now, as I've said with this one, it is a bit of a snug fit because the pockets are quite tight, but you can see with making them the same size as the pockets, but with the pockets being glued at the bottom, it makes them sit just above, and I quite like that effect there.